I've had the pleasure of getting to know David Case, our speaker today, over the past several weeks. One thing I can say about David is he is very enthusiastic, has a lot of energy, and really loves the Lord, so I appreciate that. He's the founder and director of Live Free Ministries in McPherson, Kansas. He's been a pastor for some 30 years, was involved in school administration, Christian school administration, and now he's been leading this Live Free Ministries in McPherson for the last 22 years. David and Kelly are married. Kelly is an OB/GYN or OB nurse, and they have 3 adult children and 8 grandchildren. Each of the children are involved in ministry, so that's great. You'll be blessed by his practical wisdom and his desire to see people grow. The intent, I think, of Live Free Ministries, and he can tell us more about this, is to really minister to people who are broken. And in my opinion, that includes every one of us. So we look forward to having David speak to us this morning.
I should have started this ahead of time, right? Welcome. It's a pleasure to be here. Are we ready? Are we good? Okay. I'm actually going to just start with a real practical thing. This little card here, I know me once I get going. I forget everything else, so I'm going to give you a few practical things. This little card here obviously tells you who we are. It's Live Free Ministries, and you can find us at livefreeministries.com. Part of the reason I give that to you, I do a podcast. You can actually pick up on several things that I'm going to be teaching today, and so that'll give you a chance to look at that at the podcast. And then the second line, if you didn't come prepared and you want to buy some books, the second line, you can go to Live Free Ministries, and we have a place you can purchase books, but you're getting like about a half, getting a much better deal here. So, and you know how websites are and how you'll give them a headache. So you basically have to treat it almost as a donation. So if you want to do that and just list whatever book is there. And then The Effective Heart Change is the name of the podcast, and then that's an email for me. And so that's just some practical stuff while I remember. There are some books on the book table back there. You can grab those. I think you said they were basically to buy with cash, first break only. I'll probably leave them there the rest of the day if you want to look at them and pick them up. So, again, it's just an incredible pleasure to be here. I grew up spiritually just a few miles from here. One of the things that I did, I attended Wichita State and got involved in InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. The Navigators were the rival group. You guys were you were the competition, I mean, it's kind of funny. Hopefully not really. I mean, there was a good collegiality and good connection. But in that time, and some of you may remember Shadow Lakes Apartments. I don't know, they are no more, but there's like a Dillon's, and right over there, that's my wife and I were married while we were still in school. And while I was there, it was, again, just in the tradition of inductive Bible study, really started getting into the Word at a deeper level. And something just got a hold of me about the words heart, spirit, soul, all of those kinds of things. It's like, what does this even mean? And just kind of as a pretext for where we're going to go, I want you to think about this. If someone asks you, how are you doing spiritually? We almost always answer that with well, I prayed this morning, or I read my Bible, or I've been to church. And God gave me a fascination with the word spirit and the human spirit. In Romans 8:16, God's Spirit bears witness with our spirit. And it's interesting, we don't talk about spirit a whole lot in terms of human spirit and spiritual capacity. And it's interesting, if you go back and you look at the historical perspective, there was a Greek perspective that was very much mind-centered. There was a Jewish perspective that was very much heart-centered. So it's interesting that even in the days of Jesus, you had this same dichotomy of worldviews where you've got one over here and one over here, and the two don't get along very well. And it's kind of interesting. There's times when you see Jesus, if you're watching what he's doing, he's actually bridging the gap. He's in a way that he's speaking to the mind-centered Greek type people, and he's also then coming over here and he's speaking more at times to the heart-centered people. And so you've got these two different worldviews. Well, one of the statements that I hear all the time that I want to challenge you with today, and I want to try to expand your thinking in some of these areas. You hear about the battle is in the mind. And what I would tell you, that's absolutely true. The mind is incredibly important, but I'm going to change the language to a battle is in the mind. And I want you to understand the battle that happens in the human spirit, in the heart, at the heart level. And so we're going to be talking a lot about the human heart today and how it works and how you can reach into the lives of people, because I'm not thinking mine. In fact, think about that today. Think about the whole woke culture and everything that's going on today. Everything you say, are you ready, can or will be used against you. And we're not far from not just used against you, but in a court of law. I mean, we're to a point where your words can potentially come back on you legally. We're moving in a completely different direction in our nation right now. And so words, a lot of times, I mean, that's what we've used. And it's like, okay, to win you to Christ, we're going to have a battle of words. And if I win the battle of words, then you need to come to my side. And that's been a lot of the mentality through the years. And that's not a wrong thing. Obviously, the Jews' debate was huge with them. It was kind of like you would get together into a room and you'd have a word fight, if you will. And whoever won, well, evidently you have the better idea, so I'll surrender to you, I'll submit to you. And so, again, part of that is culture. Part of that is the way it should work. We should have these debate of ideas, and these sorts of things should happen. But what I'm telling you is, in our modern culture, I think we've got to step back and take a little bit different approach if we're going to be effective. I named the podcast Effective Heart Change. I named it that for a reason. Why? We need to learn how to be effective in our culture. Can you say amen? I'm used to that. One thing I'll just tell you, I am so used to feedback, and one of the things that I will also tell you, someone have one of those little cards here, right here. Let me show you. See these things right here? We're going to do two things today. Number one, I'm used to ministering to addicts at this point. They don't know church culture. So we have meetings, it's open discussion everywhere all the time. It's kind of like, what? I don't understand that. And you know what? I love that. In fact, I'm at my best at an impromptu level. So, and I know many of you are like, well, I can't do that. Won't be comfortable with that. But as the day goes on, if you hit a point and you're frustrated by something, I don't mind confrontation. You're frustrated by something, you don't like it, you don't understand it, whatever, feel free. Wave a hand. We've got roving microphones. They'll come find you, and that'll happen. If you're someone who says, I'm not going to be that guy, we have these sheets for you, and if things come to mind where it's like, I don't get what you're saying, I don't understand, and this will happen, because when you start to talk from a spiritual viewpoint, our culture is much more materialistic. Our culture is much more works mind oriented. So when I start explaining to you a spiritual worldview and stuff, there's a good chance you're going to be going, huh? You're speaking a foreign language. I don't get it. So these are here. You should have a couple of these available to you. Write out any questions. I can either take them at the beginning of the next session, or this afternoon we have a full discussion clip. And because we're limited to tables today and we can't do a normal discussion group, I'm going to be doing breakouts every 20 minutes or so, because we can't do a table group. So guess what? Look at the guy at your table. You say, you better be good. Because if you're not good, this conference isn't going to be near as fun as if you are. Okay, all right, I shouldn't do that, okay? But we're going to do some breakouts, very short pieces, You'll do some discussion so that you get some interaction there. Because of the way the format is, then this afternoon's discussion piece is primarily going to be here and here, where we're asking questions and going back and forth. So get your questions down, turn them in, be ready to ask those after lunch. And so the discussion phase this afternoon that you normally do in breakout groups is going to be kind of more of a lecture format. So any questions on how we're doing this? So hopefully, I really am. I seriously, jump in, get involved, ask questions. It'll make the day more lively. I'll enjoy it. I think you'll enjoy it as well. Let's go ahead and get to the notes. And you can see that first line, for the battle for hearts and minds is no longer simply a battle over truth. If you think about that, I hate to say it, but we're a few years behind. That went out in about 1990, where all of a sudden this thing surfaced that was my truth and your truth. How many of you remember when that kind of came along? And all of a sudden it's kind of like you'd sit down with someone and you'd argue the gospel and you'd argue. I remember one guy who I actually grew up in my high school class, and we were both debaters, and so he came. At that time I was at Salina. I was actually teaching in Salina at that point. And he came, and we literally had an 8-hour day because he wasn't in the faith. And so he came and sat down with me, and I would argue the gospel with everything I had for an hour, hour and a half, argue it to a standstill, and most of the time, I am who I am, okay? I felt like I won. I'm sure he felt like he won, okay? But you'd argue it to a standstill, and you just, it's like, okay, I pinned you down. You've got to admit that your logic isn't winning here. The gospel is true, and it's kind of like, let's just find a new topic to talk about. We've exhausted that one. And it was like literally all day long. We sat and argued the scripture, and at the end of the day, guess how much progress was made? Nope. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And somewhere around 1990, it really flipped into this thing of my truth and your truth, and my truth is my truth, and you can't speak to me, and you can just dump all you want. And then we fast forward 30 years, and now we've got, are you ready? Information feeds. My information feed says this, so yours must be wrong. And we've done that. We've got all of our camps. We've got all these different little places. And so I'm hanging out here. And frankly, when you're battling over truth in today's culture, it just isn't very effective. There is a point at which it can become effective. But on the front end, if you're reaching out to somebody who does not have your point of view, your chances of getting them to hear you by arguing truth are slim and none. And so I'm going to be talking you through what I feel like is a different approach today, just because I believe it's more effective. What message? Let's go ahead and take a look out of Proverbs 23, 6 through 8. Do not eat the bread of a miser, nor desire his delicacies. For as he thinks in his heart, so is he. Now, I want you to notice that part of the verse, because how many times have you heard it quote? Well, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. You've heard that quoted. How many of you heard that quoted? More than once. We say it over and over again in the Christian community, and that's part of why I'm using these verses. Eat and drink, he says to you, but his heart is not with you. Interesting. His heart, notice the word, is not with you. The morsel you have eaten, you will vomit up and waste your pleasant words. Now, what message does the miser send? And I want you to understand, actually I skipped over, I'm sorry, the line up above. We don't just speak words, we send, you should be able to guess at this point, messages. That's why I noticed that I missed it. We don't just speak words, we send messages. And this is something that we miss. So often people are offended at other people because it's like, well, these are the words I used. How many know your faces speak? Your body language speaks. And I'm going to tell you, there's this thing, I call it spiritual presence. There's countenance. The Bible talks about your face has a countenance. It's amazing to me in the program. We had a guy who showed up about 10 days ago, and there was defeat, and there was just a brokenness, and there was just a dejection, and he walks in, and his countenance just, I mean, you didn't have to ask him any questions. You could look at him, and there it was right there. It was just all over his face. And it's neat to watch him. We're about 10 days later, and I've been talking to him, and I'm saying, look, you're in a different place. I can tell. I don't even have to ask you a question. I can look at your face. I mean, his face, the fatigue, the brokenness, the despair, all of that. There's a smile on his face, and it looks rested. All you have to do to send a message sometimes is look at somebody. And the miser, what message is he sending? I want you to think about that, and I want you to understand what's happening here. How often do people miss the miser's message? Because when the miser's like, eat, drink, go ahead, I mean, they're hearing the words, and they're hungry, and they're seeing the good food. So it's like, of course, I'm going to jump on this. I'm going to go. Well, the word translated thinks comes from a root word that means to act as a gatekeeper. Now, to act as a gatekeeper. Now, it's not hard to understand why, if you're an English translator, you wouldn't put that as a man gatekeepers in his heart, so is he. I mean, it's kind of like I'm looking at that going, that doesn't really work. And so I'm looking for the appropriate word, and the best word that you come up with at that point is, as a man thinks in his heart. But the root word that it comes from is gatekeeper, and there is no other place in Scripture where this word is translated thinks. So let that soak in terms, and this is the verse that we quote all the time when we say, as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. I often use the word driver with people, and that's an incredible word. A few years back, I'm continually trying to come up with new ways to work with people, and especially broken people, and et cetera. It's like, okay, how do I help you move from point A to point B? And a key word that I've come up with is driver. And so the question that I would ask you, what is your driver? What do you care about at the deepest level? The best measure of a person, the rest of that is, what are the gatekeepers of your heart? The driver is actually the best picture we have of who God created us to be. When I'm looking at someone, I want to know what they care about at the deepest level. And I have an entire teaching that I do on spiritual gifts that really comes back to, as it points out down here, the commonly used language for this concept is core values. We have language in our culture, we call it core values. I believe that in order for God to get you to do what He wants you to do, He placed deep drivers in you. And I like the word drivers because it brings forth this idea of passion. What is it that you are so passionate about that you can't live without that thing? You're going to do it no matter what. And if you go to the spiritual gifts for evangelists, you get some people in the church who are evangelists. I mean, they've got to tell people about Jesus. You get people who are teachers. In case you hadn't figured, I do a little bit of teaching somewhere in there. And so I think deeply, and I want others to think deeply. And so I'm passionate about understanding. I'm passionate about knowledge. It's crazy, and I don't know where it came from. But I can tell you, and this is strange for a young kid, but I can remember literally lying in my bed at nighttime. I can remember one time, even with tears, saying, God, give me wisdom. It was just a deep, deep driver and passion in my heart. Now, who are you? What's your driver? What makes you tick? And sometimes your words, as a man thinks, your words are an indicator. When I listen to people in order to understand their speech, it's interesting. If a person is a teacher and understanding and those kind of things are important, guess what word they will use a lot? Well, I need to learn. I need to know. You listen to their speech. The key words that they're using is like, oh, there's the driver right there. You get a person who's an evangelist, like, oh man, we gotta find a way to get the gospel out there, and they're continually excited about sharing information with somebody else. You get someone who's a servant. They're looking at needs. They're looking for needs. There's deep passions. There's deep drivers. Do you know what your passions are? Do you know what your driver is? And frankly, it's going to make a huge difference when you start seeing people for who they are and you're able to validate them for who they are. You want to talk about something that's powerful for heart change? I'm still struck by John Maxwell, and it's an old story, but many of you may have heard it, but I love, he talks about the time that he got on an airplane. And he said, you know what, I'm going to try an experiment. And his experiment was he deliberately dodged any questions about him, what he did, any of that sort of stuff. So he went through the entire flight. All he did, he said, I'm going to spend this time asking this person about them. So he spent the entire flight just, hey, who are you? What do you do? Just kind of interacting, and it was entirely questions about the other person. They got off the flight and they're walking, and as he's walking, this person meets family members. He goes, oh, I met the neatest person on this flight. You know what Maxwell's conclusion was? Everybody's favorite topic is themselves. If you really want to be able to reach into somebody's life, get interested about what they care about. That's just an incredible point for you, and we're not good at that. We're good at hearing words and processing words, but we're not good at seeing heart passions. We're not good at hearing heart passions. We're not good at follow-up questions about people's passions. If you really want people to feel cared for, if you want people to feel loved, you've got to start seeing people. And when you start understanding these drivers, you will start seeing people at a higher level. A person's gatekeeper, a person thinks inside of his core values. All right? Person thinks inside of his core values. Now, this isn't the way we teach it, so argue with me if you want. We'll get there. But here's what I find, and here's an example that I think you'll understand. Anybody been ticked off in the last 24 hours? Believe it or not, I was not too happy with my wife for a little bit last night. Okay? What happens, we think, feel, and even many times choose inside of what's going on at the heart level. Especially if, I love this one because it's so immediate and so powerful. Especially if bitterness gets triggered. Anybody brave enough to admit that happened in the last 24 hours? What happened to your thoughts and your emotions that fast? See, you didn't choose those thoughts that came. It's just kind of like this offense came in, and when that offense came in and it kind of took over at the heart level, just instantly, your thoughts went from here to here, and your emotions went from here to here, and you didn't choose. Well, now that this person has done that, and I see who this person really is, I need to think different thoughts about them. Doesn't work that way. You see, think, and feel from inside of those spiritual dynamics, if you go back to love, joy, peace, okay, that's the good stuff. But right before that in Galatians chapter 5, you've got the bitternesses and the hatreds and the envies and the jealousies and all of that. That is a spiritual dynamic that comes and it takes a hold of your heart. And when that thing gets a foothold and it takes a hold of your heart, your thoughts are different, your feelings are different, everything's different, and it's just alive in a negative way. And all of a sudden it's like, you're sitting there, Romans chapter 7, you're sitting there going, I shouldn't be thinking this. Oh, I better not speak what's going on in my brain right now. Oh, David, get a hold of this. Amen? If you're married, you better know what I'm talking about. Sometimes you don't want what's going on inside of you coming out. It's kind of like, I better deal with me. I might have a forgiving wife, but don't be foolish. Amen? So you think, you feel, everything. Once that internal stuff is going on and going off, this is what I'm trying to say. We have tried to boil life down to an intellectual worldview, and we're holistic people. It doesn't work that way. And there's this thing at the heart level that if I don't start seeing things at the heart level, I'm kind of missing a whole lot of stuff. A person's gatekeepers act as a filter for messages being sent and received. So, I get ticked off immediately. My wife can look at me wrong. Anybody been there? She can just, it doesn't take much. Once your spirit is in a different place, once your heart is functioning there, all of a sudden I've got this filter up and I'm seeing everything from a completely different point of view. And then here's the real kicker. You don't know it because you think that you have self-control. But there's this filter on the message going out. It's interesting, just kind of a quick story, which also happened at Shadow Lakes, go a lot of years back. My wife was in nursing school when we were in college. And for whatever reason, my body is designed that I don't look sick, act sick, anything until after I'm really 90% well. So I show almost no symptoms on the front end, and so there was one particular day that we hadn't actually started school. She started before I did, and so I hadn't started back in. And I'm like, man, I'm in terrible shape. And she was kind of like just blowing me off, going, "You're not sick." Well, it's kind of funny because she'd been to nursing school, and she came home with her tongue depressor and said, "Open up." And she looked, and she just kind of got a little bit white. She goes, "Your throat is just like completely white with pus pockets." And I was like, okay, never mind. You really are sick. And it's kind of interesting because from that time on, my wife has learned if she wants to know how I'm doing, she's got to see my eyes. Because you can't tell from my physical person until a day later, 2 days later. 2 days later, everyone's like, "Oh, you're sick." Well, it's kind of like, "Oh yeah, bring it on. I need some sympathy, because I didn't get it over here when I really didn't feel good. So give me all the sympathy I can get, all right?" But over here, when I'm really feeling miserable, unless you can see my eyes, you're probably not going to know I'm sick. And my wife over the years has learned, she really has learned to see my eyes. And so here I am, I'm ticked off or whatever. How about this one? I remember the day she walked in the room and said, "Stop yelling at me." I'm kind of like, "I haven't raised my voice. What are you talking about?" She looked at me and said, "You're yelling with your eyes." How many of you would be in trouble? Think about it. We are a culture that has been desensitized to the spiritual realm, so we don't live at that level very often. We just kind of, that just kind of whoosh, right over our heads. But my wife learned that to know me and to see me, she had to be able to see my eyes. And here's what I'm telling you, your spiritual man, your heart filters a message that's going out. And I'm practicing my words, and I'm careful with my words so that people who aren't my wife might be fooled. Now that flows directly into the next points, which is, why would the miser tell the people to eat? Answer is very simple. The miser wants more money. You know, if as a miser you get a name for being a total jerk, it's going to be hard to do business. So at some level, you don't understand the filter. You don't understand what people think about you. So you're out there, oh, I'm putting on this lavish party. It's like, let's see, if I put on this and I spend this, I'll get this on the back. Okay, calculated risk. I'll put that out there because it's going to be good for me in the end. Miser doesn't feed them because he wants to feed them. In fact, at the heart level, the whole time he's saying, eat and drink. What's going on? You miserable loser. I wish I could tell you what I thought. So there's a spiritual message going out, which is why the passage says what it does. Why would the person feel the need to vomit up the morsel? Because he finally saw the miser's heart. What if you're there? You're the one with the miser, and you're eating, and as you're putting the food to your mouth, all of a sudden you realize that miser despises every bite you take. Now, how many rebels do we have in here? If you're a rebel at that point, you're a strength person, it's kind of like, give me some more. I mean, there's that firepower in there. You're a strength person. It's kind of like, oh, you don't want me to eat? Oh, you got a negative heart? Well, I'm just going to kind of put it in your face and rub it a little bit, okay? If you're a rebel, there's that core fight in there. But most of us at that point, if we understand that the miser is despising every bite we take, at some point it's kind of like, see you later. I'm out of here. These are the dynamics that are going on inside of us, inside of conversations every day. And the gatekeepers also filter what? What's going out? The gatekeepers filter what's coming in. So you've got to understand, and most people really don't understand this. They don't understand their core values. They don't understand the deepest place. They don't understand the filters they have in place. If you don't understand the filters you have in place, are you ready? There's a pretty significant level of blindness to you, because you're thinking inside of this stuff. And are you ready? Because we are intellectual, we are objective. We are talking about objective truth. Amen? Is that not how we think? Is that not how we feel? We feel like we are processors, and we have studied, and we've done all the data, we've done all the research, so we have objective truth. Might as well go there. Science. The science says, how many different versions of the science says are in play right now? Can we say more than one? More than about 50? I mean, you've got the science says just fighting, and every one of these people are claiming objective truth. I mean, if you have any idea of truth and how truth works, you can't have all these different versions of objective truth. Somebody's missing objective truth. But what do we have? We have my truth. We have information feeds. We have gatekeepers. And you mix all of those together into this composite thing, and all of a sudden everybody's claiming their truth. And it doesn't work very well. And so next thing you know, we have this dysfunctional society that still believes in objective truth. So I'm going to practice mine, but we're on totally different pages. For us to begin to be effective in the gospel, we need to understand some of these things and start working from a point of view of wisdom that cooperates with it. Now, we're going to go ahead and do our first breakout, and because breakouts are what they are, that means you don't go anywhere. So if you take a look, we're going to give, initially I'm just going to say 5 minutes. I want you to do the activity that is listed, and because one of the things that I find is really important, back to gatekeepers, back to heart issues, etc., if you can get to know the other person a little bit, that'll be powerful as we go on. And so you have a table partner. We'll see how chaotic it is. The acoustics may be a total mess to where I have to drop this as the day goes on. This is a total experiment today. But we're at least going to start with activity number 1, give you 5 minutes to walk through the questions that are in there with the person at your table, and then I'll pick up and do the second part of this message. So.